page at gpstrategies.com. Now I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Matt Baker. Since 1997, Matt has worked in the learning and performance space supporting the manufacturing, retail, IT, and consulting industries. Matt has supported clients as an on-site consultant, project manager, solutions architect, and account manager over the course of his career. Currently, Matt leads GP Strategies consulting and sales enablement practices. So with that, Matt, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Kayla. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thanks.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I appreciate everyone taking time out of their weeks here to meet with the GP Strategies team. Our talk today is really focused around concepts around optimizing performance of your key sales contributors, both at the frontline level from a sales manager as well as a sales rep perspective. Getting started, just a little bit about my background. Over the course of my career here at GP Strategies, I've served in many capacities. I started off as an actual consultant and a project manager. As time went on, I actually moved into a bag-carrying sales rep, and I did that for a couple of years. And from there, I moved into sales management. I've managed everything from singular regions to all of North America for the better part of the last 8 years. And currently now I'm actually running one of our business units and focused around sales enablement as well as our consulting practice. So once again, I appreciate your time today, and we'll go ahead and get started. As everyone on the telephone knows, sales systems are being re-engineered constantly. And at the center of this re-engineering process is your customer. Your customer ultimately dictates how you need to position your products, how you need to position and optimize how your people operate, and it really impacts a number of key areas. First and foremost is really the strategy that the organization as a whole sets to support these customer requirements. This strategy typically gets set year to year, and in many cases it gets amended through the course of the year because, as we all know, customers are continually requesting new and different things based on the needs in the marketplace. The next key aspect that really customers affect within our internal organizations is leadership, and how leaders lead the sales team and the direction of the sales team is really paramount. Some of the best sales organizations out in the marketplace have strong foundational leadership both at the executive levels and certainly at the field level from a sales manager perspective, which we'll get into later on in our presentation. The processes, as we all know, are also another vital part of the overall sales process. In order to ensure that your sales representatives are able to operate in an efficient, effective manner, you really need to have optimization across all of your processes that your sales representatives have to leverage in support of the customers. And lastly, on the bottom is really the people side, and that's really where we're going to focus today. In many cases, the sales rep and the folks out in the field from time to time are often the forgotten equation of ensuring that your sales engine is optimized. As we all know, there's a lot of factors and influencers that really impact our ability to effectively sell in the marketplace. As I think about from an external perspective, each of our worlds, being the sellers, consistently change, whether that's internal change around direction, offering new products, offering new service lines. In many cases, sometimes we go through reorganizations. All these things add to the complexity of our internal sales model. At the same token, our buyer's world continues to grow more complex. Buyers in this market oftentimes now have a lot higher expectations of sales representatives when they walk in the door. We've all heard the statistics that anywhere from 50 to 60% of executives believe that sales representatives come in underprepared in support of a meeting. And in many cases, the folks that we're actually selling to are anywhere from 45 to 60% of the way through the actual buying process prior to ever actually engaging a real-life sales representative. So obviously this presents a lot of complexities for the sales reps as well as those who support the actual sales engine within our organizations. One of the other big challenges we see is really what I call, from an internal perspective, internal shifts. In many cases, every year, a sales strategy is set, and sometimes through the course of a given year, that sales strategy is altered, and when it starts off at the top, in many cases, it's, hey, we're going to go in a new direction. That gets disseminated down to the leadership, which then gets disseminated down to sales managers who ultimately need to enable their sales team to act, execute, and sell in many cases differently. And at the end of this shift is really the actual sales reps. And in many cases, they're wondering, well, how do I execute differently? What are the expectations that I am expected to execute on in this new world? And what are some of the things that are being provided to me to support the execution of that new approach? So that drag between strategy and execution oftentimes leads to reps really being in a position to where their performance is not being optimized. In many cases, they spend a lot of time doing what I'll call back office busy work, and it really impacts their effectiveness and in some cases their overall engagement. So as we'll discuss later today through our course of our conversation, it's really imperative that the strategy be set, and as it gets disseminated down through the organization, there's a very defined enablement strategy to make sure that the sales reps can actually execute on that new vision. So what does this all mean? As we all know, from a sales rep's perspective, and even from my own experience, sales reps have a lot on their plate. Everything from lead generation to proposals, bids, quotes. They constantly have to interface with customers, whether that's acquisition of new logos, whether that is maintaining and developing existing accounts, whether that is focused on some of the internal activities that most of our organizations require, whether that's reporting or supporting weekly pipeline meetings. At the end of the day, they really have a lot on their plate, and this is just a small smattering of that. And so in order to help them navigate these waters, an effective enablement strategy that helps them optimize how they work, that gives them easy access to the content they need to interface with their customers effectively, and gives them a model in which they're supported, is all imperative not only to the sales rep's success, but more importantly to the overall organization's success and ability to actually achieve the business outcomes that they set in the initial strategy. So this creates an overall challenge that many organizations today are facing. Oftentimes we hear phrases like, hey, we've got to sell different. We have to sell higher. We have to sell bigger deals. We have to sell more of our new product or our new service offering. And that's challenging in and of itself, and it's even more difficult to teach, coach, enable, and more importantly, sustain that performance and those learnings anytime that there's a new way of executing that's been rolled out. So how do we move the needle? At the end of the day, really we need to be focused on providing more value to your customer base and optimizing the sales rep's abilities to be effective in the field and provide value back to those customers. So how do we navigate that shift? I'm sure many folks on the telephone have experienced this over the course of their careers, but there is certainly, as you move from an old way of selling to a new way, and that could, again, manifest itself into a variety of, whether it's an overall new direction, whether it's moving from a more traditional to a more consultative approach, whether it's through a reorganization and a reshuffling of internal resources and how they support the actual sales team. These approaches oftentimes create internal friction points. And in order to effectively navigate that, you really have to focus on the holistic system to ensure that all aspects are optimized and enabled to ultimately support those in the field who are interacting and interfacing with your customer base. So how do we first look at from a holistic picture of getting from our current state to our desired state? So at TP Strategies, we kind of focus on what we call the shift journey. You'll notice at the center of this model is the customer. And one of our key embedded underlying themes throughout any engagement is to ensure that everything we do is anchored back to the customer. And this model really helps enable organizations to change at the speed of business. The premise behind this is it is an ongoing evolutionary cycle, and it's not just a one-time event. It really becomes a systematic way of enabling the organization or the representatives out in the field as a holistic organization. As we start to look at the top here from an awareness perspective, one of the first and most critical steps in ensuring that you're able to change at the speed of business is really understanding, hey, what got us here won't get us where we want to ultimately go in this new way of working. So ensuring that there's that awareness level across the board, both at the executive leadership level, all the way down even to the sales representatives level is imperative. Once you've kind of established what that delta is and what that new pathway could look like, you then move to the alignment phase. And through the aligning process, you really establish a new definition of success. And then, again, the key anchor point to this is your customer and your customer's expectations. Because as we all know, as things continue to evolve, in order to be effective and to beat our competition, we need to be continually evolving and making sure that we're able to keep speed with our customers. Once that new definition of success has been established, it's now time to actually enable the organization, and specifically the sales team, with this new way of working. And from our perspective, it really needs to be a holistic process. As we'll talk about here later on, there should be aspects of communication and change management. There also needs to be, from a holistic process, you need to enable folks at the points of performance. So they need to understand what the new expectations are. They need to understand how to execute on those new expectations. And more importantly, and most importantly, you need to provide the support. And this support now gets us into the anchoring phase. So how do we make this new way stick? So we do this from a two-pronged approach. First and foremost, one of the key aspects of ensuring that your rep's performance is optimized is enabling an effective sales coaching model. Your frontline sales managers really are kind of the tie that binds the organization and ensures that the reps have the proper support and the proper coaching, tutoring, and mentoring in order for them to be effective. Secondarily, as we all know, sales managers can't be everywhere, every time, every day of the week. So we need to make sure that we can optimize ways that deliver performance support. And what I mean by that is whether it's marketing content, whether it is prepackaged decks, talk tracks, etc., we need to make this information A, standardized, and B, readily accessible at the sales representative's fingertips. And lastly, is really, once we've established this model and actually enacted it, we kind of move into more of a sustainment mode. And sustaining really is all about two things. You know, number one, we want to continually evolve and improve based on where we currently are today. And a lot of that really comes from ensuring that we maintain open lines of communication within the entire organization. One of the things I found in both my experience and working with our customer base is that oftentimes some of the best suggestions to improve how we perform and how we operate come from the field. So we need to make sure that the sales reps have a vehicle to voice those thoughts, suggestions, or recommendations. And more importantly, the organization needs to be in a position to enact those recommendations. At the same token, we need to make sure that learning is ongoing. At the end of the day, many sales organizations that I encounter, sales training typically is a once-a-year event. It happens at the sales kickoff, maybe throughout the year if there's a new launch or a new offering. But outside of that, there's really not a whole lot of effort around sustaining learning. So at the end of the day, this 5-phase process really helps ensure that as an organization, you're optimizing your ability to change at the speed of business and keep pace with your customers. So how do we get started? As I stated before, one of the central themes behind all of our approach is really thinking about things from the customer's point of view. When we engage with customers, that is really one of the first things that we take a look at. Certainly, we take a look at the holistic 360 view of your sales engine and processes, but we also want to make sure that at the end of the day, as we engage with our customers, we understand their customers, we understand what the expectations are, both from a customer perspective and from a marketplace perspective. And that's really one of the first key points that I want to drive back today. As I look at a holistic model, one of the things that we've learned from a best practices perspective is you cannot address all the performance challenges in a linear fashion. Sales doesn't operate oftentimes in many cases in a linear fashion, and because of the complexity and nature of sales and selling, you have to look at the holistic view of all of the interconnected systems within your org that support the sales system and the sales processes. Starting in the middle, we've talked about clarity of intent, and that really starts to focus in on what are your customers' expectations of your organization? How can your sales representatives better represent your company, your value proposition, your services or your product offerings to those customers in order to really ensure that at the conclusion of that meeting, they have a very clear understanding of your value prop, they understand how you're different and your differentiators, and they understand at the end of the day that you will be a consultative partner. The next key is really sales leadership. This, again, is one of the central themes we'll see throughout our presentation today. In order to really make sure that at the end of the day, sales rep performance is being optimized, it really starts with the sales managers. We have to make sure that at the end of the day, sales managers and the sales teams are aligned to the executive visions. And also, conversely, we need to make sure that these executives also understand the reality of the field. In some organizations that I've worked with previously, we see from time to time to where there's a vision set, and once it hits the field, there certainly is either some confusion or some concern in some cases that that vision is not really realistic. And in some cases, there's certainly cause for concern and validation that could be true. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that from the executives all the way down to the sales leadership team, there's a consistent thread, there's a consistent message, and there's alignment and information sharing back and forth. As we look at the top left, one of the next big keys is process integrity. And this is really, from our experience, critical to ensuring that representatives understand what they're doing, how to do it, and the organization as a whole also understands how to effectively support the sales teams. Some good quality examples include, how do we make sure that we've got the right content prepared and ready, and how do we make sure that folks understand what that looks like? How do we understand and how do we more effectively leverage the CRM? So what are the processes that are involved? What are the standardized methods of not only inserting data, but also disseminating and deciphering that data? Another great example that I just actually spoke to a customer about the other day is what's our response or proposal processes? Do we have the right teams? Do we have the right processes to make sure that we're optimizing the way that we are responding back to our customers? On the bottom, it's organizational environment. And this really talks now about the systems. So how do we make sure that the organization as a whole, as I stated earlier, provides an environment in which direction is clear, communication is open, and we're always looking to continuously improve. And the last and the focal point of our talk today really is around people readiness. At the end of the day, anytime that you're executing a new way of working, anytime that you're rolling out a new sales strategy, even if you're rolling out a new product or service offering, the folks in the field have to understand the what's, the whys, the hows, and they have to also ensure that they have a support network that they can go back to with questions. They have to have the right enablement materials to support them being confident in representing that new offering or that new product to the marketplace. And taking that extra time to really craft a solid enablement strategy also just really promotes continuous improvement, continuous learning, and instills confidence in the representatives that they're being supported. And oftentimes that results in a higher engagement level with those sales reps. So as I think about moving from kind of an as-is to a to-be or desired state, through our experience, we often find that there's, in most cases, there's a lot of good in what many of the organizations are doing. And in some cases, that could require some tweaks, that could require some significant overhaul if there was a significant change in strategy. But at the end of the day, there's a couple of core themes. From a focus perspective, one of the biggest challenges that we see in the marketplace today is that training and enablement for sales teams is typically more reactive. And what I mean by that is that training for those new product launches in some cases is an afterthought. As we think about new sales strategies, the enablement aspect for ensuring that the sales reps understand what that is and why that direction is being set, in many cases doesn't always get disseminated clearly or in a standardized manner to the sales reps. So by moving from reactive to proactive, to where we can advance plan out and make sure that the reps are trained and enabled to execute well in advance of when it's needed, just really instills confidence in their ability to go out and represent that value back to the customers. From an organizational perspective, oftentimes we see organizations, in some cases, very fragmented. And what I mean by fragmented is, there's instances where leadership says, hey, we need to sell more, we need to sell bigger deals, and at the same token, there's really not a strategy to help enable that. And so as we move to that desired state model, it really becomes more of an integrated approach to where the folks that are working to enable your sales teams, they're part of those initial conversations. They're part of at least taking part in vision setting. And so at the end of the day, the organization as a whole becomes more integrated. Messaging gets more standardized. Enablement gets sent out more proactively. If I think about scope and design, many of the organizations that we work with, in some cases, take a transactional approach to training. And going back to something I said earlier, training is something that kind of happens once a year. And in that desired state model, training is really strategic and it's structured, and it's ongoing. And that's really one of the key things, is to make sure that learning isn't a one-time event, it's a continual event. And I think you'll be surprised by the benefits that even the sales representatives see, from that type of approach. From an ongoing support perspective, in many cases, organizations have, I'm sure we've all seen it a million times, SharePoint sites that have all of our sales stuff out there for sales reps to access. And oftentimes what happens is sales reps will just consistently use the same deck, the same talk track. Oftentimes managers quickly discover, oh my goodness, this person's just using the same thing as a one-size-fits-all for everything. As we kind of move forward, and we'll talk a little bit more about this momentarily, that ongoing support, we need to make sure that there's support from the sales frontline managers, but more importantly, when sales reps are supporting sales calls, sales meetings, and customer interactions on their own, they need ready access to support content, whether that are things such as fly sheets. In some cases, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but some organizations are leveraging technology and simple approaches such as interactive PDFs on those iPads or mobile devices to enable the reps quick access to the information they need while they're sitting with customers. From a customer perspective, a lot of the training we see in a current state is really focused and honed in on market offerings. These are our services. These are our products. Here's our tech specs, or here's kind of the general or internal view of what these offerings are, and they're more descriptive. And from a customer perspective, as you continue to better enable your team, you truly do become and enable them to become more consultative. And today's customers expect a lot more consultative selling than what we've experienced and seen in prior years. So it's imperative that we really take a holistic view at how do we enable the team to carry better conversations, to equip them with the right information, data, and insight to have an informed point of view and carry on a better conversation with the customer, as opposed to just simply talking about market offerings and the descriptions for each of those offerings. And lastly, from a success factor perspective, in many cases, training is skills or information orientated. I think we see that a lot across the board, and really that desired state is to become results orientated. At GP Strategies, we definitely look at things through a performance-based lens. What are the business outcomes we are trying to achieve? And then we work backwards from those business outcomes and develop an enablement or training strategy that effectively supports the achievement of those outcomes. So as I think about what are some of the key enablement drivers for supporting moving from kind of that as-is to that desired to-be state, the first, as I said earlier in our presentation today, is really leveraging the customer as the design point. In order to be effective and in order to effectively enable your sales team, you need to ensure that the customer is at the center of all learning. That will enable and ensure that they always have the customer's view in mind and helps them ultimately have better, more effective customer interactions. At the same token, one of the critical steps to ensuring this is done effectively is you need to spend time identifying what those customer-focused performance outcomes are. And what we mean by that is, we've all heard, hey, we need to sell more. Okay, well, how do you actually enable your sales reps to sell more? Could be a wide variety of reasons for why a particular rep or a team of reps is not being effective, and typically it's because they are not looking at things through a customer-centric, performance-based lens. The next key is effective frontline coaching. As I've said before, one of the hypotheses or principles I apply to my sales teams as well as to our customers is you have to enable your frontline sales managers to actually spend the time coaching, training, spending time in the field, and really supporting the enabling of those reps as they work with your customers. So how do we do that? As I think about really a first critical step, it's ensuring that you've identified what those coaching requirements are. So sometimes what we see in the field is, like with most sales teams, you have a wide variety of different types of sales reps. And oftentimes the challenges are different by each rep. So you have to make sure that, number one, there's a consistent standardized processes that are being followed. But number two, you have to be able to, whether it's through a toolkit or a set of tools, really provide those sales coaches with the ability to diagnose challenges. You have to be able to free them up to actually be in the field, to interact not only with your customers but with your sales reps, And ultimately, you need to be able to allow them to capture and disseminate best practices from the field. So I think some of the more successful customers we've worked with in the past really have a sales coaching model that enables them to quickly identify, capture, and then cascade and enact some of those best practices they see with their sales team members. Enablement at the point of performance is really one of our third key enablement drivers. And one of the things that I've talked about a few times here today is ensuring that learning aligns to desired performance outcomes. So it's not just enough to say, hey, you got to hit your quota. We need to take that down a notch and really describe the what's, the whys, the hows, and enable the reps to actually better interact with customers to actually achieve those outcomes. So how do we do that? One of the key ways, and I've mentioned a little bit of this before, is really enabling the reps to continuously receive ongoing training and learning. And this doesn't need to be a 3-day event. This doesn't need to be 3-hour webinars, etc. But if you're able to really put together a protocol or an enablement program that sends out things on an ongoing micro-sized chunk of information, it really just helps make sure that they're up to date, they're up to speed, there's a consistent sharing of information. And then secondarily, you need to make sure that at the end of the day, when a rep's out in the field, they need to have ready access to the content, the materials, and the information they need in order to better prepare for meetings, in order to better support meetings. And we need to make sure that they understand what the sales process looks like, because at the end of the day, one of the biggest challenges we see with sales representatives is they're not oftentimes able to carry a consultative conversation. As I stated earlier, they show up with the same deck, the same talk track, and that's what they go with all day, every day. And at the last bullet here is really about promoting peer-to-peer learning. So some of the best organizations we've worked with really schedule the time, make the time to really promote this peer-to-peer learning to happen. Again, it's not enough just to say to do a buddy system. It's really all about how do you capture the essence of what your best sales reps are doing, how do you then distill that, and then how do you actually cascade that out to the organization so you do not miss the opportunity to capture that and enable the team to also execute in that way. The next is technology as an enabler. So my favorite story is I was working with a customer and they gave their sales representatives iPads. And as we were sitting talking with our customer, they said, hey, the first question all the sales reps asked is, what do I do with these? So one of the things I'll say is technology, it's not about the technology. At the end of the day, you can leverage technology in the form of mobile content, which I'm sure many of you do today. And the key, though, is ensuring that from a sales process perspective, content and information is organized in a way that a sales rep can get to it real time. So one of the best examples I've seen that we've worked with a customer on is, for instance, developing a interactive PDF that followed their entire sales process. And so based on where they were in the customer conversation, they were actually able to pull up relevant materials for that conversation based on where they were in the sales pursuit process with that customer. And then at the same token, this customer took this a step further and also leveraged, for instance, FaceTime technology to allow their support folks from the back office to actually sit and dialogue live with a customer. One of the key underpinnings with all these things, though, is the aspect of organizational change management. So communication is paramount, and it's critical to ensuring that everyone has a clear understanding of the direction, has a clear understanding of the expectations, and also has a clear understanding of what the new ways of working and what those execution parameters look like. So as I think about, as an organization, some of the results that we've been able to realize with some of our customers. In the first example, we worked with a global pharma company. They were really interested in understanding and bettering and optimizing and enabling their reps to perform on a more consistent level. And as we started working with this customer, we also uncovered a number of things by sitting down and unpacking their sales process. We helped them ultimately reestablish a more streamlined sales process. We also helped them establish a new profile for their sales representatives. Once we established that performance-based profile, we actually then worked with them to develop training and an enablement program that supported the achievement of those performance outcomes. Through this process, this particular company was able to exercise a reduced time to competency by 4 months. So from a sales perspective, obviously that's huge because in some cases, studies have shown sales reps take anywhere from 9 to 15 months to really get up to speed. And ultimately, they were able to realize a $1.1 million per year return on investment on that. The next example was from a large retail organization. In this particular case, we worked with their call center, and at this particular time, their call center really was more of a question reception bank. So any types of product questions, any types of issues oftentimes got routed there. And what we're able to do with this particular customer is, in many cases, customers would have questions, and that would often necessitate needing to purchase another product in order to complete, in this case, whatever project they were working on. And what we enabled the call center team to do was to actually have conversations with customers that not only addressed their questions, but took it a step further and enabled them to make sure that they were able to purchase additional products that they may need. Through that process, we also focused on better enabling them to perform at a more optimized level, at a more standard and consistent level, and overhauled how they onboard and train folks. And in this particular case, we were able to realize 25% reduction in time to competence, and they actually were able to exercise and realize an increase of $1 million in sales per week. And when this started off, the benchmark was just about at 0. And lastly, from an apparel and equipment company, we really focused on helping them reshape the way that they onboard folks, number one, and number two, also help them take a more holistic approach at cross-selling. So what are the processes? How do we better enable folks to understand the different product lines and offerings and how they interrelate, so that way they can go tap their peer on the shoulder through better conversations and sell more to the customer in this particular case and add more value from a holistic company perspective. For this particular company, we're able to, again, reduce onboarding time by 30%, and that company also realized an increase of cross-sales in about 40%. So lastly, in conclusion, a couple of the key takeaways that I'll leave everybody with today is, number one, is to really be focused on leveraging the customer as the design point for all training and enablement programs. This will help ensure that the sales reps are better aligned to the needs of the customer, and this will facilitate better customer interactions and more effective conversations with your customer base. Number two is to really establish an effective frontline sales manager coaching model. It's imperative that you enable your frontline sales managers with the right tools that will ultimately support the optimization of sales rep performance. And at the same token, one of the biggest challenges is ensuring that those sales managers have time to actually execute to that end. The third point is really develop training that aligns to the importance of performance. It's not enough just to hand a rep an iPad. It's not enough to offer e-learning that they can take when they're sitting in a hotel room. You really need to provide them mechanisms and means of quickly accessing content, information, and data real time that will help support their interactions with their customers. And to that end, leveraging technology as an enabler for performance. So it's never about the technology, as I said earlier with my iPad example. It's how do you leverage that technology to better put information and make it more readily accessible to your sales reps. And lastly, it's ensuring that you've got strong and formalized change management protocols to drive standardization and alignment across the organization in support of any sales strategy shifts or even down to simple rollouts of new service offerings and products. So with that, I thank you all. GP Strategies, for those of you that are not familiar, has been around for about 50 years. And, I think a couple of the key takeaways I'll leave with everybody today is, specifically with my team and as our organization as a whole, one of our key focuses is around business outcomes. So it's not just enough to develop quote-unquote training. You really have to develop an enablement strategy that's focused on achievement of those business outcomes and that aligns specifically to your customers. We do this through some of the methodology components that we talked about today. And ultimately, we are a global organization, and we've been working in this space now for about 25 years. So with that, I thank everyone for their time. We will now open up the QA session, and Kayla, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Matt, for that informative presentation. I know there was a lot that we covered today, but since we do have about 15 minutes left, if you do have a question, be sure to enter it into the Q&A module at this time. We have had a few come in that we'll get to. As I just said, Matt covered a lot today, so there's definitely some more to discuss. We encourage you to continue the conversation with him, and his contact information is available in the slide deck. We'll be sending everyone a link to a follow-up blog post as well, where Matt will address some of today's key takeaways. I also want to remind everyone that the recording and the slides from today will be sent to the email address you provided within 48 hours. And so what I'll do is now I'll go ahead and get to these questions that are coming in. Matt, the first one I'm going to throw your way is, from your experience, what are some of the barriers to ensuring that frontline sales managers are able to effectively coach their sales reps?
Yeah, thank you, Kayla. Great question. I would say that, as I look at the bigger picture, sales managers' plates are full, and, it's very easy within the course of any given week to get caught up in the day-to-day rigors of internal reporting, proposal writing, working with customers, and at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you provide an actual coaching model and tools that facilitate and promote that coaching to actually be done. So, I think some of the things we talked about today is really taking a look at and assessing what types of tools do your managers need. And some of it could be very simple, everything from simplified checklists. I hate to go that simplistically, but at the same token, there's other avenues too, to where they may need more actual coaching training programs as well. So, I think some of the keys definitely come back to you've got to have an actual coaching model, and then you need to provide the tools that enable them to actually coach to those points of performance that ultimately enable their sales reps to be effective. And lastly, you have to make sure that they actually have the time and ability to do that.
Great. Another question is, how have you seen other companies effectively leverage technology to support their field sales reps?
Yep. Yeah, I think I addressed a little bit of this in my presentation earlier, but a colleague once of mine said, it's not about the technology. And, I think going back to some of the best examples I've seen some organizations to where they literally have they developed an internal app, and we help support the development of all the content and the app layout and the approach that was leveraged. And this app really, it laid out all of the content they need by sales stage. And from there, it broke it down even more granularly, in some cases based on their offerings that they were selling to customers. It had everything from, differentiators and value propositions, and it really just provided the sales reps a very easy way while they're in the field to have all that information readily accessible to them versus trying to dig for it on a SharePoint site or going through the exercise of, calling 3 people to find whatever that piece of information or content was that they were looking for. So again, going back to the things I said earlier, the easier and more simplistic you can make it for reps to access that data. And, the other thing is to make sure that that is always up to date. As soon as the first time it's not up to date, somebody's going to inevitably get caught with their pants down, and that will ultimately cause the reps to lose confidence, in the content because they'll be concerned it's not accurate, it's not up to date. So, not sure if that addressed the question or not, but
I think you did. Okay, so one more question. When you mention using the customer as a design point for training, can you please explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So I would say, one of the key components to that, and I guess one of the best examples, is we hear a lot of companies right now talking about, and it's not a new phenomenon, it's something that's been going on in the marketplace for a while, but moving to a more consultative selling approach. Well, how do you do that? In order to really effectively develop that type of approach, you need to enable your reps to have a more qualified, more consultative discussion. And really one of the key design points with that is to ensure that you have a really solid understanding of marketplace expectations. You've got a solid understanding of, based on the buyer role, what types of questions, what types of, expectations they have from a typical sales meeting. And, you have to then develop an enablement strategy that allows the rep to tailor their point of view and to tailor that conversation to the level of buyer that they're talking to. And that really is one of the best examples because it's one of the most challenging. And at the same token, if reps, those that master the ability to do that, we found are typically more effective. And in many cases now, especially with today's marketplace, reps are having to talk to more and more people in more roles and more levels in order to work a deal through to closure. So, when we talk about using the customer as the design point, that's really one of the best examples is ensuring that your sales team members are actually able to have that qualified point of view, and they're able to actually carry a tailored conversation based on the type of buyer that they're sitting in front of.
Great. We have another question that just came in. How can you help to instill a culture of consistency in your sales reps? Being consistent on using training materials, using materials out in the field, hitting their action items in their daily work, etc.
Yeah, great question. So, I think there's a couple of key things, without knowing your specific situation. But, number one, it is to really ask the reps what's most effective. Some of the most best suggestions I've ever seen came from the reps because in one example, we thought we built the best content, and the reps said, hey, the content's good, but the way that it's being delivered, it's just hard to access, or I don't have time to get to it, or it's difficult to find. So, I think one of the first steps is if you've got good content and everyone agrees, I think it's really becomes really about how do you deliver it in a more effective, efficient way that's more readily accessible to the sales reps. And at the same token, it really requires the managers to make sure that they're kind of keeping a keen eye on that. Marketing as well as sales enablement teams within organizations spend a lot of time, money, energy, and money working on developing content and working on developing support assets. And so it's really imperative that you also incorporate the sales reps into that to make sure that what you're putting out there and what you're putting together matches not only what the customers need, but making sure that the reps are able to access it, and it really kind of fits into and aligns back to your sales model.
Thanks, Matt. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions coming through, so we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up. Thanks again to today's speaker, Matt Baker, and thanks everyone who attended for your time and attention. We hope that you'll join us again for our next webinar on why learning should be at the centerpiece of your talent management table. This will be on May 14th. So for GP Strategies, I'm Kayla Roth, and I wish everyone a great day.